tuning into this channel for the first time,
please hit that subscribe button to show us your support, and also hit that bell to let us know that you're enjoying what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Today we are going to talk about the Elseworlds storyline that's been going on in the television series with the Arrowverse, which
Basically, it was Arrow, The Flash, and Supergirl.
exactly.
Right.
And it's basically leading up traces to a storyline that we all know in terms of those of us that's been reading comics for a very, very long time, which is called The Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Okay, now The Crisis on Infinite Earths came out at around in the 80s, right around the same time, around 83, 84.
It was actually 84 to 85.
Okay, right around the same time when the Secret Wars was going on for Marvel. So DC and Marvel were competing for the readers on the big crossover at the time. The only difference is the Secret Wars took place on the place called Battle World of what we mentioned before.
And then the DC universe was basically, you had a war between the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor for control of the multiple parallel Earths, which were being destroyed by the Anti-Monitor at that time.
And now might I add too, upon watching that crossover, because the crossover starts off with the Flash and the Green Arrow switching places, and when they wake up the next day or wake up, they're wondering like, okay, they have each other's lives or whatnot. It was just a simple fact that multiple Earths were getting decimated. And they even showed a cameo or a small clip at the beginning of the first episode of Earth 90, which contained the 1990s version of the John Wesley Shipp version of the Flash.
Of the Flash.
Yeah.
Of course, that was back in 1990 when it first was released.
And hey,
it only lasted we were in college at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
It only lasted one season, but that was the precursor to a lot of the shows, comic book shows that are out
especially for the DC shows that are on TV right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And they did, and it was well done because the word Elseworlds, from in relation to the TV show, Elseworlds in the DC Comics lore is basically alternate timeline or alternate takes on characters. Like there's one story called Justice League: The Nail, where there's a time where a nail had prevented from Ma and Pa Kent, I believe, from not getting
from finding baby
Kal-El, right? And then how it changed the dynamic of the Justice League later on down the line. And then you also had Elseworld tales where Batman was basically a vampire, and then you had another Elseworlds tale where
it was Gotham by Gaslight. Batman had existed during the Victorian era, hunting down a criminal known as Jack the Ripper.
Oh, and might I add too, there was an Elseworlds tale where there was a combination of both Batman and Superman.
Yeah, that's true, and it was called Speeding Bullet.
Right, exactly.
Where basically Kal-El was found by the Waynes, and he ended up being named Bruce Wayne. And the same tragedy did take place in terms of Batman becoming who he became. But this is a spin on it where Kal-El is Bruce Wayne, and he takes on the mantle of the Bat with Superman, basically being Superman at the helm of it, basically being Batman with Superman's powers.
Yeah, and there was also another storyline or another book that came out back in the day called Brotherhood of the Bat. And it had multiple iterations of Batman, but they all had like these cool costumes and everything. This was like in the 90s.
And that was Talent. It was basically Talent. What was it? Not Damian Wayne. His name was Talent, and he was the son of Talia al Ghul and Bruce Wayne, but he was the one that ended up having to bring the world back from the brink of destruction. But that's another story for
But see, these were just basically Elseworlds tales. And then what was your favorite Elseworlds tale?
Well, before I even go into it, I was going to say with the Elseworlds moniker, it's basically this. These are characters or worlds that could have existed or that shouldn't have existed, but they exist here in the Elseworlds, and these are the worlds that we are exploring now.
And that's kind of like the elements that they put in the TV show for the Arrowverse, because when it started off, the first episode of The Flash had, again, the two characters had to switch places.
Of course, yeah, I remember seeing that, where they were basically, it was just kind of crazy to see Stephen Amell and Grant just playing each other's
Oh, but
characters.
see, the thing is too, you didn't that I paid attention to and I noticed. In Earth 90, you see Firestorm dead on the battlefield, Captain Cold dead on the battlefield, and then the Flash was like the last survivor because the Monitor was basically getting ready to destroy Earth 90, which was
I thought it was the Anti-Monitor.
no, it was the Monitor.
So they did a spin on it.
Yeah, they kind of did a spin on it, but the Monitor kept mentioning that something bigger and greater and a bigger, greater threat was coming to threaten the multiple Earths, and that they needed to. And the heroes of
See, I didn't get that when I was watching that.
and
earlier.
so basically he was testing those characters to see which Earth is going to be the strongest to go up against the bigger threat, bigger than the Monitor.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Anti-Monitor.
Right, exactly.
And they're cribbing different elements from Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Now,
But like I said, it hasn't come up yet. It's a big storyline that will be coming up later
Right.
on this season.
Actually,
Coming in
next year.
2019.
Yeah, because they
coming up in 2019.
Yeah, because they announced it in the final episode of the Elseworlds tale. They announced it the last panel or the last shot of the film or of the TV show. Flat out said, "Coming soon in 2019, Crisis on Infinite Earths." Oh, and by the way, too, during the Elseworlds timeline or the Elseworlds crossover, wherever Barry and Green Arrow went when they had their places switched from the Monitor and the Doctor, that was in the show, the skies were red. And it was lightning flashing with those skies red. And you know, in the Crisis on Infinite Earths in the books,
Yep.
whenever the skies flashed red or turned red,
That means the world is about to end.
exactly. And so they pulled elements from that. And they even put that in the Justice League film when they were towards the end of the film.
Oh yeah, that's right. They did
Yeah.
put that in there towards the end with the final battle with Steppenwolf and the Parademons.
Right. So
And it was one of those things that I said, oh, they cribbed this from that. I guess they're going to be pulling more and more elements from that particular series.
but then with the Elseworlds 3-part storyline, Superman did make an appearance and he had to go toe to toe with an evil Superman during that show. And Supergirl and the Flash, they also almost met their final fate counterpart, like their counterparts did in the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, because in the books, in the Crisis on Infinite Earths, there were a lot of casualties, there were a lot of deaths, and there were a lot of Earths that were being eliminated, because basically at the time, that was DC's versions of pushing the reset button on their characters and
and
resetting
their
it.
timelines, because basically it had gotten so convoluted
Right.
from all the various timelines that they created over the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. They had to find a way to clean up everything, so they eliminated so many Earths at that time.
One of the things too that they had in the Elseworlds tale towards the end, which hinted to the Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Psycho Pirate showed up with the golden mask.
Oh, and that's basically
Yeah.
their version of the Pariah, because the Psycho Pirate.
Actually, he wasn't a pariah. They
No, I
haven't
mean-
even introduced him yet because
That's right. That's true, because the Psycho Pirate was one of the last survivors, but that's with the Crisis. But in terms of Elseworlds, let's getting back to the main point. What was your favorite Elseworlds story?
Mine would have to be Legends of the Dead Earth. It was a 2-parter, like annuals that came out like in the early to mid '90s, which crossed over with Superman and Superboy. But the second part, which dealt with Superboy becoming Superman.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
talking about Legends of the Dead Earth? Wait, they did an Elseworlds. That was the Elseworlds annuals that came out in
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
1994.
about. That's what I was referring
Yeah,
to.
the Legends of the Dead Earth had Superboy. They had a different iteration of Superboy where it was in the far-flung future. He was more of a Native American version
Okay.
of Superman. I mean Superboy.
Well, what was that one I was referring to where the aliens had invaded it?
That was called the Super 7, Part 1 and Part 2, and that
But wasn't that the Legends of the Dead Earth? Or
No, that was the Elseworlds. It was the Elseworld. It was a whole annual of Elseworlds that entire summer of 1994. Where you had a different iteration of Superman, where the last survivor of Krypton was not Superman himself, not Kal-El, but one of his ancestors, who left Krypton knowing it was about to explode. He gets to Earth, and he is still alive, but he kept the entire human race in check the way he wanted to. And over time, he did have kids with humans, but each of those humans kept dying off because they weren't compatible with his genome until the 5th or 6th generation, which in turn produced Kal-El, who was more human than Kryptonian.
You know, what's one thing that was interesting is that that would also come into the fore of being an Elseworlds tale?
What was that?
The Injustice comic book line that's gone on recently with the video games.
Yes.
That's on the PS4 and the Xbox and things of that
Yes,
nature.
yes.
You can consider that Elseworlds too, because that basically is dealing with, and that's my favorite take on Elseworlds.
Okay.
Even though it's not labeled as Elseworlds, I'm calling it Elseworlds just for the simple fact. You got Superman being a dictator over the planet after the death of Lois Lane at the hands of the Joker. And to me, that's like the best Elseworlds tale, if you want to call that, for that video, and that is especially in relation to the video game or whatnot. And so, with that being said, some of the takes whenever they have these Elseworlds storylines in the comic books on the DC end, that's kind of like the equivalent of what Marvel does with their
What If.
What If, right?
Because I'd have to say this, and I want to interject, is that my favorite out of the Elseworlds storylines would have to be Superman at Earth's End. And this is where you had a version of Superman that dealt with Kamandi, the last boy on Earth, but dealing with an apocalypse that wiped out most of the human race. And he himself had gotten so caught up with trying to fight for the human race that he was lost in the fog of time until he was rediscovered by Kamandi. While Kamandi was trying to murder him, but only to find out that basically the machine mother who had caused the whole apocalypse wanted him to kill Superman, but Superman turned out to be an ally.
Real quick, who's Kamandi?
Kamandi is the last boy on Earth that was created by Jack Kirby back in the day.
Okay.
And he was basically a futuristic version that was for the DC universe and had to fight against the elements that was trying to take him out. But yes, Kamandi was the last boy on Earth created by Jack Kirby. I have to go back and do my research in terms of who was the writer.
And then we'll definitely talk about that at some point.
But it was one of those things where it was called At Earth's End, and it was the last final battle that Superman had to fight with his powers waning.
And plus he was an old man, and he had a lot of long gray hair and a big giant-sized beard and everything.
And he was literally almost a little over 200 years old, and with his powers waning, he had to fight against the real reason what caused the apocalypse, the second apocalypse on Earth, and also try to avenge the death of his best friend, which would happen to be Bruce Wayne, who also happened to be used in portion of the second apocalypse as well.
Well, I might interject too. We could sit here and talk all day about these Elseworlds tales because there's so many of them. But in reference to the TV shows, I liked how they put those characters together in different scenarios where Barry Allen was Green Arrow, and then you had Oliver Queen being the Flash. That was an interesting take, and then the awkwardness of them trying to use each other's powers or whatnot. So I thought that was so pretty cool how they handled that. It was well done. So
I'd like to also say that I'm looking forward to more Elseworlds stories because in turn they show different iterations and different kinds of variations of these characters that we all know. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing if this DC decides to do a variation on Superman, which was called Red Sun, where Kal-El crash landed in the Ukraine, in the Soviet Union during the time of the Cold War, and history turned out a little bit differently.
you know what I want to also bring up and interject with that too?
What was that?
What was it like? It was like an Elseworlds tale, but not an Elseworlds tale.
What was that?
Flashpoint.
Oh yes.
Flashpoint.
We still have to talk about Flashpoint in greater detail.
Versa. I just love how Elseworlds, that title of Elseworlds, just mix and match of our certain characters, basically bringing fresh new takes on that kind of stuff. Yeah. So.
And like I said before, or rather we both mentioned before, we will talk about Marvel's version of that, which is called What If. But the first Elseworlds book that was created, but it wasn't considered Elseworlds back in the day, was Batman: Gotham by Gaslight. If you get a chance to read it, I highly recommend it.
And also, the art was by Mike Mignola. But also, too, if you can't check out that, check out the adaptation, the animated film Batman by Gaslight as well.
Yep, exactly. You will enjoy it. But in any case, our time is up, and this is another version of another episode of the Comic Anthologist. And if you're tuning in for the first time, please hit that subscribe button. Until then, and also hit that bell to let us know that you enjoyed it. Until then, take it easy, and we will be definitely bringing more comics and more knowledge to you in the future.